Chapter 3 of your textbook introduces the idea of the motion of the moon. Now we know that as Earth rotates, then what happens is that the stars rise and set. Really the Earth rotating that's doing that. We know as Earth revolves around the sun, it shifts the way the sky looks a little bit. We know that as Earth precesses and nutates, that also shifts things. One of the things, though, that's a little bit different here is that when we're talking about the planets, unlike the stars repeat. You know, Orion looks like Orion. You know, the Big Dipper looks like the Big Dipper. The summer triangle is the summer triangle. For all of your life, they're going to look that way. They're not going to change how they appear. The planets shift position a little bit all the time. It takes a certain amount of time for them to move around, but you know, they do move around. You know, Mars is in a different constellation just about every month. Jupiter's in a different constellation every year. So they move. The moon moves, and it moves about a constellation every couple of days. And so it's in a different spot, different. You go out some nights and you see the moon low in the western sky, you know, in the early evenings. Other times you go in the early evenings, it's high in the sky. Other times you go out early evening, it's just rising. And sometimes you go out at night, you don't see it at all. It's up in the mornings instead of in the evening. And sometimes it's up in the daytime. And so what happens is the moon moves around quite a lot, and it moves around in a rather regular fashion that's fairly quick compared with the planets. Most of the planets take years to go through a cycle. The moon goes through a cycle in just a few weeks, a month. And so that makes it a little bit different here. And so we want to study the motion of the moon. It's also the closest of the heavenly bodies to Earth, and so it's going to have one of the biggest effects on us. So one of the first things we realize when we study the moon is the moon is not shining by its own light. And they actually figured this out in the ancient world. Aristotle realized the moon does not shine by its own light. Instead, it reflects the light shining on it from the sun. And so what you see when you look at the moon is you see the side that's lit up toward the sun. And so that became a very important first step in understanding it. You know, the sun is shining because it's hot. It shines with its own light. The moon reflects the sunlight. The planets reflect the sunlight. And so when you're seeing the phases of the moon, you're seeing reflected sunlight. So this graphic is straight from your textbook. So this is page 53 of your textbook. And the sun is off at an angle to the upper right and shining onto the moon. And the idea being that when you're standing on the Earth, you're looking up the moon, and the other side of the moon is lit up by the sun. Over here, you know, you look at the moon's about half lit up by the sun, so you see half of moon. Okay, I don't like that graphic right there because it's at a funny angle. I like this one better. It's a little bit more simplistic. And there we have Earth, okay? And when the moon is lined up with Earth, with the sun, then when you look at the moon, you don't see anything because the other side of the moon is lit up. There's always half the moon lit up. You know, you've heard dark side of the moon. Dark side of the moon is not the side away from Earth because when the moon is between Earth and the sun, the dark side is the side that's towards Earth. The other side is lit up. Okay, and when the moon and Earth make right angles right here, you look at the moon and you see half the moon lit up. And we call that first quarter. And so why do you call it quarter if it's half? Well, because it's a quarter of the way around the orbit. Okay, now, between not lit up and completely lit up, if you look at the moon here, you see only a little piece of it lit, and you see a little crescent moon. Okay. Now, when the moon's exactly opposite here, so we got Earth, we got the sun to the right, we get the moon over here, then when they're exactly opposite, then that means the side that we see is the completely lit up side, and so that is the full moon. Well, between half lit up and full moon is like mostly lit up, but not completely. So that'd be looking at the moon like this, and you see only a small part of it that's not lit. We call that a gibbous phase. Now, as the moon goes around the Earth, then it gradually appears to be getting more and more lit. We call that waxing. So the waxing moon looks like it's getting bigger. Well, once you get past full moon, the moon keeps going, and so what happens is you look at it and you see, a little bit not lit up, so that's again gibbous, but it's a waning gibbous, getting smaller. And then the moon here, again, half of it's lit up. Well, if you're standing at Earth looking at the first quarter, okay, so you look at the first quarter, look out towards the first quarter, you see the right-hand side of the moon. If you're in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it's the other way. But you see the right-hand side of the moon lit up. So you would say that's first quarter. On the other hand, when you at this, you sometimes call it last quarter or sometimes third quarter. That is the left-hand side of the moon lit up. Okay, and so eventually the moon gets smaller. We have a waning crescent, and finally back to new moon. And so these are the cycles of the moon's phases. Okay, new moons. These are the dates of new moons for 2020. I didn't put all of them on there because I wanted the slide big enough you can actually read it. Okay, so I just went from March to December. And notice, what we got here. We got March 24th. We got the 23rd, 17th, 21st, 20th, 19, 17, 16, 14, 15. It's roughly middle of the month, each of these, but not exactly. The dates are gradually getting a little bit earlier. Okay, well, now the other thing to note is that this is at 9:27 Universal Time, 2:26, 17, 6, 17, 2. So it's like morning, afternoon alternating. So what does that mean? Well, it means the moon goes through a complete cycle of its phases. So to go from new moon to another new moon is a complete cycle of phases. It means it's going in a little bit less than a month and about half a day. Turns out it's actually 29 and a half days. Okay, and in fact, I said it's about a month because in the old days, the word month comes from the term month, or cycle of the moon's phases. And so a synodic month is the length of time it takes to go through one complete cycle of the moon's phases. And in fact, they used to keep track of time this way. A cycle of the moon's phases, before they had calendars, then they would say, I'm going to be gone, on this long journey, and I'll be back in 2 moons. So the 2 moons would be 2 cycles of the moon's phases, or 2 months. Something may have been many moons ago. That would be many cycles of the moon's phases ago. Or you might say, the semester is going to last for 3 moons. So that would be 3 months. And so this would be the kind of way that you would refer to things. The synodic month is about 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds long. Now, it's not exactly that length of time because what happens is that as the moon orbits the Earth, you have the forces of the planets and the sun pulling on it. The moon's orbit's slightly elliptical. It speeds up and slows down. There's a variety of things that are happening here. The Earth going around the sun is speeding up and slowing down. That kind of changes slightly how far the moon has to go until it gets back lined up with the sun. So all these factors shift that a little bit back and forth. But on average, it turns out to be about just a little bit more than 29.5 days. And so that is the synodic month. Okay. Native Americans would actually name the moons. You know, one of the first moons of the year they call the winter moon. Okay, and generally this was the first moon after the winter solstice. They call the winter moon. And then they have another moon that's sometimes the ice moon, and the worm moon is usually the third moon of the cycle, and that was usually in March. And then April is sometimes called the wet moon or the rain moon. Okay, and then the May moon is the flower moon, because after all the rain, you're going to get wildflowers. And then of course what happens is that after all those flowers, you have bees and honey, and so the moon that normally occurs in June is called the honeymoon. And then in the later part of the year, we have the hunter's moon and the beaver moon and several other kinds of moons there. So they actually name these, and now different Native Americans or different cultures named them slightly differently. But you can look on the Blackboard site, and I have a list of some of the common names of the moon that are there, and the one of the exceptions here is the moon that is closest to the autumnal equinox. So the autumnal equinox is normally September 21st or 22nd or something like that. The full moon closest to that is always called the harvest moon, and that displaces what other name it might have. And typically the hunter's moon is the moon that follows the harvest moon, no matter what month it is in. And so there we have the names of the moons. Okay. You've heard of the blue moon. Well, in the early colonial days of the country, then what happened was the Farmer's Almanac, grouped the year into quarters. So 3 months at a time, and there's usually 3 moons in that month. Well, if you actually look at 3 months, the calendar month is slightly longer than the synodic month, which means it's possible if you have a full moon at the beginning of a calendar quarter, you could squeeze 4 moons into the calendar quarter. Okay. And so that kind of messes up the naming system. And so what they did was they had a term called the blue moon, and that was the 3rd full moon in a 4 moon quarter. So there's going to be 4 full moons in a quarter. That was considered the blue moon. You've heard the phrase once in a blue moon, because a blue moon comes every 2 to 3 or 4 years or something like that. Now, unfortunately, this term blue moon got confused, because what happened was back 150 or so years ago, there was a reporter that was reporting about the blue moon in the newspaper, and he mentioned that the blue moon was the 2nd full moon of that month. Because that month was happened to be November, and there was a full moon at the 1st of November and a full moon at the end of November. The second one was the 3rd full moon of the quarter, and so that was the 2nd full moon of the month. Well, then what happened was on a radio program back in the middle of the 20th century, they looked at that phrase, and they mistakenly thought the 2nd full moon of the month is called the blue moon. And that was then published in Sky and Telescope magazine. So what's happened is that the term blue moon now frequently is referring to the 2nd full moon of the month, though that was not what the original term for blue moon meant. So full moon dates for 2020. And you notice that, again, they alternate, here. And one of the interesting things is they gradually get earlier over the course of the year because of the timing. And October is going to be 2 full moons in 1 month.